Aspect ratio, the ratio of width to height of your image or video. A characteristic of videography that I've felt has gone entirely misunderstood across most of YouTube, but is finally being used more creatively, even in the film world too. This is part 1 of my quest for the perfect aspect ratio. Here, I'm going wider. In part 2, we'll cover my quest for going taller. Aspect ratio isn't just a tool to make something more cinematic. Hell, slapping black bars or cropping your video to CinemaScope doesn't magically make it cinematic in the first place. Aspect ratio is a tool to control what the viewer sees and guide the narrative. That's what cinematic truly is, controlling everything the viewer sees to advance your story. I've spent a lot of time experimenting with aspect ratio in my work. I'm a huge fan of posting native 4:3 content, both out of nostalgia's sake and to enjoy watching on a CRT television, but also because I like how things get framed in 4:3. I rely on a lot more centered composition. I can focus your attention a lot more easily. For detailed heavy tech videos, that seems perfect. The only reason I don't do it more is due to the reliance on screen capture for my work, which is typically at least 16:9. On the other side of the coin, I've also experimented a lot with posting ultra-wide videos. 21:9, 2.35:1, ultra-wide, whatever you wish to call it. I have multiple ultra-wide monitors deployed in my secondary setups, and being able to cater anything to exactly that screen capture size has been fun. Shooting on a full-frame camera now with my Canon R5C and wider lenses mean that I have no issues cropping for that format as long as I plan for it, and I can output safe zones to my preview so I can compose correctly as I shoot, so I know where everything is supposed to go. But ultimately, I have less control. The screen gets filled less with the subject, and much of the format gets wasted. Unlike a film where you'd be shooting a massive controlled set with many characters and tons of CGI, my videos tend to only have a singular subject to draw attention to, myself or a product. As I've developed my style and experimented with aspect ratios, I sought out tools to make that easier. There are lots of ways to shoot for the aspect ratio you want. When I shot with my Ursa, I had a magic booster lens mount that replaced the original lens mount and pushed the camera closer to a full frame field of view. Wider lenses and monitors or recorders that let you monitor with safe zones are a must. Aiming for wider experimentation, I reached out to SIRUI, I'm never gonna say that name correctly and I'm so sorry, to try out some of their new anamorphic lenses. I saw them back at CES a couple years ago, and they're making some of the most affordable anamorphic lenses on the market. They sent out their 35mm t2.9 lens and a 1.25x adapter to play with. The 35mm lens is a beautiful piece of kit. Solidly built, accepts 82mm filters without vignetting, and unlike a lot of anamorphic glass, is a wide enough focal length for my kind of shooting. It's got cine-style rings for follow focus and aperture controls. Anamorphic lenses are lenses that squeeze light into a tighter view in your camera that you squeeze out later. So this lens has a 1.6x squeeze factor, squeezing 1.6 times the normal amount of light of an image onto my camera's sensor. Since the R5C doesn't have a 3:2 open gate option, Canon, please unlock this, please, that ratio is applied to the 17:9 DCI aspect ratio that video is recorded at, resulting in a nearly 3:1 aspect ratio once it's stretched back out. Wild. Using this lens has been a blast. I was surprised how in most cases it seamlessly integrates into my workflow. The R5C has a built-in de-squeeze option for monitoring video, so I can mostly preview accurate footage for the most part. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a 1.6x de-squeeze, so I have to use 1.8x. Causes me a little bit of issues with how I appear stretched out in my preview, but between the inaccurate preview de-squeeze, confusing the focus peaking, and the picky close focus distance, some of my up-close handheld product shots that I was confident were in focus have been out of focus in a couple videos. This has been annoying. The lens has perfectly usable close focus overall, which I was stoked for, but it's not as close as my normal spherical lenses, so between those mentioned issues, I have trouble with the more run-and-gun style B-roll sometimes. Editing these clips in DaVinci Resolve, I have encountered a weird bug. I can't imagine it's supposed to work this way, but it's very strange when it comes to scaling these clips, because by default, you know, it's squeezed into the image. So this would be the 17:9 view that you'd see. So then you unlock your X and Y, and you just multiply the X by 1.6 for the 1.6x de-squeeze. The problem is, even if I lock these two back so they're supposed to move perfectly to maintain the aspect ratio, as I scale this, you can watch, I get stretched out as I go smaller, and I get skinnier as I go taller. It is not scaling them at the appropriate ratio. However, this isn't a problem if I nest the clip in a compound, then zooming in and out works fine. Or if I just, lock it like this and use the normal transform effect, which is more intense to run. And if you're on a non-16:9 timeline using a stretched out clip, it adds black bars, so you lose some of your field of view. Again, you can nest it to avoid that. But now if I zoom in on this, it's not changing the aspect ratio, at least as much. Yeah, I don't think it is at all. It's a very weird thing. I've never been sold on anamorphic workflows before, though that's often due to cost. You usually either need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on anamorphic lenses, with Atlas making more accessible high-end lenses and now SIRUI making really affordable ones, or to jerry-rig a crazy 2 to 3 part setup with projector lenses strapped to your camera lenses, and it just never felt practical to me. But this 35mm has quickly become one of my favorite pieces of glass. It's sharp, it's crisp, while not looking too video-y. The anamorphic bokeh effect so many people seek is very much still there, without being too overbearing, IMO. It's smooth to use and has a wide enough aperture to work in my low-light indoor scenarios. My only real complaint is one that I'm not sure is realistic, but one I want to mention anyway. I want the ability to rotate the lens within the mount. Certain other anamorphic lenses can do this. I believe Atlas can, and it allows you to shoot vertical anamorphic modes for a super pleasing effect. But I have a way to achieve this differently, of which we'll look at in part 2 of this video. As far as aspect ratios here on YouTube, what should you use? I don't think going full cinema scope really makes sense. It's too wide for most viewers, especially with so many viewers being on mobile. The smaller your video is, the harder anything would be to see. But this has reinforced my statements for 5 or so years now that 2:1 is the perfect ratio for YouTube. You still get to maintain in-card support, so you get to throw those things up. Those are very important. You get to completely fill many smartphone screens, and it doesn't take too much away from 16:9 viewers, while offering a little something more to ultra-wide viewers. 2:1 and 17:9 are just so pleasing that if a wider, more narrative-driven ratio is what you desire, that's what I'd suggest. Shooting wider and cropping, or shooting anamorphic and filling the frame, means you have tons of extra room to adjust your composition in post, or do some virtual panning and tilting to make shots a little bit more dynamic. And it creates a pleasing image. It's hard to deny that. For me, I'm sold on a hybrid workflow. When it feels right, videos will be 4:3. When it makes more sense, I think we've landed on 2:1. A good balance that keeps things varied per video, but also helps tell the stories that I want to tell. In part 2 of this video, because it's going to be 2 parts, I'll show you my hacky workaround to get 4:3 working this way, because it's pretty interesting. Remember, it's all about controlling your composition and cinematography to direct the viewer. And remember to be kind. Rewind.